Hi, I'm Reese Martin, a photographer from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I originally put this presentation together for the Tulsa City County Library for a travel series in January 2017. For folks that weren't able to make it to the actual presentation, I thought I'd record it and put it up for anybody to see. So, my presentation is Route 66. And so before I actually get into Route 66 itself and my travels down the route, I thought I'd give you a brief introduction to myself. I was born and raised in Tulsa. In 2009, I sold everything I owned and backpacked internationally, visiting a dozen countries over 10 months. When I came home, my wanderlust didn't go away. I turned my attention to my home state of Oklahoma and began exploring my roots. Among the many unique places in the Sooner State, I fell in love with Route 66. It had always been here, and I hadn't paid any attention to it. Now, Route 66 has been around since 1926. It was established by cobbling together a series of existing roads, most of which were dirt at the time. It carried Okies west to California during the Great Depression, transported troop convoys during World War II, and served as a conduit for post-war tourism in the 1950s. Shortly after the interstates arrived in the late 1950s, the slow decline of the mother road began. By 1970, most of the old road had been bypassed, and in 1985 it was federally decommissioned. A few years later, hard work and persistence yielded the first State Historic Association. That was quickly followed by Michael Wallace's well-known book and several other publications, which kindled interest in Route 66. When Pixar's film Cars was released in 2006, it brought awareness of the old road to a whole new generation. Route 66 is still there. That's the biggest question I get from anybody that asks about the old highway. End to end, it spans over 2,400 miles and goes through 8 states. Many parts of the road are crisscrossed by the interstate and are poorly signed, but about 85% of it is still drivable. It's been called the largest open-air museum in the world and still draws tens of thousands of tourists annually, most of which aren't American but come from Asia and Europe to hit the road and explore the Will Rogers Highway for themselves. So the big question is, what's still out there? I didn't start driving Route 66 until 2013. Most of the documentation I could find was historic. So what I'm going to be doing is going through Route 66 on my trip, going all the way from Chicago to Los Angeles to show you what's out there and what you can see. We start in Illinois, the corner of Adams and Michigan in downtown Chicago. The great city of the Midwest is known as the City of Broad Shoulders, thanks to a 1916 Carl Sandburg poem. It's a callback to the city's industrial backbone at the turn of the 20th century. By the time Route 66 was established, the landscape had been transformed into a skyward oasis of glass and metal. The city was also ramping up the gangster life that has been romanticized in the immortal world of motion pictures. The Route 66 journey starts here, where so many headed west for fame, fortune, and in many cases, survival. Lou Mitchell's is nicknamed the first stop on the Mother Road as it sits just a few blocks away from the starting point. They've been around since 1923 and are known for giving fresh donut holes to people waiting in line, as well as milk duds for the kids and the ladies. Sitting at the counter in here is a trip back in time. The diner itself is nestled within the modern development of the Windy City. It's an excellent example of the hospitality and colorful characters you'll encounter as you turn miles on the old highway. Although the town of Joliet is 45 miles from downtown Chicago, it's still considered a suburb of the great city. This is the Rialto Theater, which opened in 1926 as a vaudeville movie palace. The ornate European sculpture work was done by a man named Eugene Romeo, a Sicilian immigrant that also worked on the Chicago Board of Trade, the Wrigley Building, Soldier Field, and many others. The interior is equally stunning. If you ever find yourself in Joliet with a little extra time, stop in. You won't regret it. Wilmington, Illinois is home to the first of 3 30-foot-tall Muffler Man statues that grace the Mother Road. The Gemini Giant, pictured here, is named such due to his customized astronaut appearance. He stands outside of a closed restaurant called the Launching Pad. Although his base is a little worse for wear and the restaurant's been closed for quite a while, he still draws quite a few tourists due to his unusual appearance and wonderful roadside attraction. Odell is home to this Standard Oil station, which was built in 1932, though it was based on a design from 1916. It's an early example of a domestic-style station, which became popular as service stations encroached into residential areas and needed to blend in. This station not only served Standard Oil, but later Sinclair and Phillips 66 before closing in the 1970s. It fell into disrepair and was threatened with demolition before it was restored in the late 90s. That restoration project actually won the National Historic Route 66 Federation Cyrus Avery Award in 2002 for outstanding preservation, and it's quite a beauty. Pontiac is home to the Route 66 Hall of Fame and has over 20 outdoor murals surrounding Town Square, including this one, which is the oldest and largest. This giant shield also has a brick lane beneath it that allows people to drive up in their car or motorcycle and take photos next to it with their vehicle. It's a must-see for any Route 66 traveler. As the road continues southwest, the city landscape turns into cornfields and farmland. This is a photo from Memory Lane, a segment of original 66 that's now a walking trail and time capsule. The quiet stretch of road on the edge of Lexington is lined with replicas of vintage billboards and harkens back to the heyday of the Mother Road. Even Kilroy's here, as you can see. The community of Funk's Grove is named after an actual grove of trees, now designated as a National Natural Landmark, consisting of various oak and maples. The town is little more than a collection of houses now, though a few old commercial buildings remain, such as the Walker store here. It was a grocery and gas station until it closed in the 1970s. Today it occasionally trades in antiques. The area remains a popular destination for roadies and non-roadies alike thanks to the operation of Funk's Grove Pure Maple Syrup, a family operation in business since 1824. I can speak personally that their syrup is unparalleled. Atlanta is a community of about 1,600 with a lovely downtown, which includes the second Illinois Muffler Man, this one holding a giant hot dog. The town is known as the geographic center of Route 66 in Illinois, and their public library, pictured here, is a beautiful building. It was built in 1908 and has a very interesting octagonal shape as well as some architectural flourish that's unusual for the area. Unlike most other libraries built during this time, it was not built with Carnegie money. It was funded by the town. The clock tower was added in the 1970s, but you could have fooled me when I visited. It looked like it was around the same time. A series of ornate courthouses along Route 66 in Illinois are a unique quality among the other Mother Road states. This one in Lincoln was built in 1905, and like most built during that time, it served as the hub of the town square. There's a statue of Abraham Lincoln you can see there at the bottom, titled Lincoln Rallies the People, commemorating the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. It's one of many. Springfield is the state capital, home to the final Illinois Muffler Man statue, this one holding an American flag, as well as a pair of stunning courthouses. It's also home to the Cozy Dog Drive-In, which is what we have here. The restaurant is owned and operated by the Waldmeyer family, who are beloved by Route 66 aficionados for their generation-spanning passion for the highway. Ed Waldmeyer Jr. claims to have invented the corn dog as we know it today. After being inspired by a hot dog baked cornbread in Muskogee, Oklahoma, he wanted a way to speed it up, so he perfected a way to cover a hot dog with batter and cook it in a short time. He started selling them in 1946, and the rest is deep-fried history. This brick segment is outside of Auburn, Illinois, and was originally laid in 1932. It's pretty short, lasting only a mile and a half, but it's the last brick segment left in the state, and is still currently maintained. It just goes through farmland and a pretty quiet rural area, but it's well worth the side trip to go down. It's really beautiful. Staunton is home of Henry's Rabbit Ranch, which came to be after Rich Henry took a trip down Old Route 66 in 1993. He noticed there was a lack of roadside attractions in his part of the state and decided to make one himself. At the time, his daughter had a pair of rabbits for pets, which quickly became many more, and today the stop is known for an abundance of the critters. The grounds also feature a few historic cars, a Campbell Express trailer, and several road signs that have been saved from abandonment. They even have a giant jackrabbit statue you can sit on and have your photo taken. As Illinois comes to the close and you enter Missouri, you pass through St. Louis, the gateway of the West, and continue to the rolling hills of the Ozarks. The corn rows of Illinois transform into dairy farms, grain fields, and fruit orchards. Forests thicken and rivers become plentiful. It's called the Show Me State, and there's definitely much to see here on Route 66. The Chain of Rocks Bridge is how you get from Illinois to Missouri, crossing the Mississippi River. The bridge is a mile long and features a 22-degree bend in the middle, surely a frightening prospect in the times of tail-fin Cadillacs and 57 Chevys. It was bypassed and closed in 1970 and sat abandoned for many years, though it was used for filming the 1981 cult classic film Escape from New York. It was restored in the late 90s and now is used as a pedestrian and bicycle crossing. Ted Drew's Frozen Custard is a frosty delight on the west side of St. Louis. Their Route 66 location opened in 1941 and is popular for concrete concoctions. The Drews family has resisted offers to turn their 2- to 3-store operation into a nationwide chain, though you can now get your fix at a vending machine at Lambert Airport if you're just passing through. The Garden Way Motel is an example of how the interstates impacted the mom-and-pop businesses all along Route 66. It was built in 1945 and held on until 2014. The large letters on the roof in the background there were added after I-44 bypassed it as an attempt to alert travelers that they were still there. Today the site is victim to vandalism and neglect, slowly weathering to an eventual collapse. The Wagon Wheel Motel in Cuba is not only the oldest continuously operated motel on Route 66, but it's also known as home base for an annual celebration of Route 66 culture called Cuba Fest. This old Chevrolet rests in peace on the Wagon Wheel grounds atop an old lift, as the motel also once duly operated a service station to help make ends meet. The winding road outside of Jerome mostly hides this native stone memorial to the Trail of Tears. It was built by Larry Baggett, an eccentric in the best sense of the word, and was originally planned as a campground. After he built a retaining wall, Larry claimed to have been visited by a Cherokee ghost that died on the infamous forced march to Oklahoma. The specter begged him to build steps over his new wall so that he could continue his ethereal pilgrimage. The stairs were built, and Larry says he was never visited again. The hillside site consists of several stone monuments and concrete statues, but when Larry passed in 2003, the site quickly became overgrown and forgotten, though a new owner is currently working to restore the memorial in the grounds for any interested travelers that come through. John's Modern Cabins is a site that many roadies are very passionate about. The tourist court was built in 1931, at a time when these roadside stops consisted of separate buildings with sparse amenities. It really wasn't much more than camping indoors. By the time I-44 was built in 1967, they were barely hanging on and couldn't survive that. The cabins were abandoned when the owner died in 1971, and most have completely collapsed by now. Interestingly, I-44 was rerouted in 2005, making this one of the few sites along the route that have been twice bypassed in a major way. The Gasconade River is outside of Hazelgreen, Missouri, and is spanned by a beautiful bridge, a bridge which was closed in 2013 due to the expensive repairs needed. The event of gathering roadies getting together to bring awareness to this bridge is actually what brought me into the Route 66 community in the first place. People came from all around the United States and around the world. We had representation from Germany and Sweden to protest the idea of demolishing this bridge for the sake of progress. Such iconic sites are the reason people take the slow road, to experience a part of America that many thought existed only in their rearview mirror. Though the bridge is still closed at the time of this recording, ongoing conversations with the Missouri Department of Transportation are encouraging for its salvation. The Munger Moss Motel was built in 1946, and their beautiful neon sign was restored 17 years ago. The owners, since 1971, Bob and Ramona Lehman, are well-known fixtures for Mother Road travelers. People stop and say hello even if they aren't staying the night. Lebanon's a great little town, and I highly recommend spending some extra time there if you're in the area. This is a wonderfully restored advertisement for Merrimack Caverns. Although the caverns are up near Staunton, Missouri, up north, advertising for these caverns has been a fixture throughout Missouri for a very long time. Legend has it the famous outlaw Jesse James even used those caverns as a hideout. The original owner of the caverns is credited for inventing the bumper sticker even to get the word out about his Jewish attraction by employing children to tie small signs on the bumpers of cars in the parking lot, since vinyl or adhesive wasn't really a thing at that time. Several stretches of Route 66 are known for their sometimes aggressive billboards, and Merrimack Caverns billboards exist on I-44 even today. Springfield, Missouri is billed as the birthplace of Route 66, as that's where the iconic number was assigned to the road on November 11, 1926. Today it's the site of a great and growing annual festival dedicated to that event. Most enthusiasts that come through try to stay at the Rail Haven, a simple Best Western on the route with an amazingly restored neon sign pictured here. The Gay Parida station in Paris Springs was built by Gary Turner. Gary was well known for his great passion and his ability to turn a 10-minute stop into 3 hours or more. Though this station isn't as old as it appears, it was built in the 2000s. It's a tribute to the site, to the station that was originally on site in the 1930s, owned by Fred and Gay Mason, which is where the name comes from. When you met Gary, you were friends for life. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2014, but his daughter has since taken the reins and greets new travelers, carrying on that Turner tradition of long and worthy conversation. The Boots Court in Carthage was built in a time before motel was a word people understood. So although it calls itself the Court, it is a traditional motel where you have multiple rooms under one roof, though they have some covered garages in between. It was saved from demolition and restored. They still have a radio in every room, and each features unique vintage decor. The neon was also recently restored. If you happen to be going through Carthage at night, to keep your eyes open for that beautiful green neon buzzing through the night. The 66 Drive-In Theater in Carthage is one of several drive-in theaters along the route, diminishing presence in all of America, not just on Route 66. They have a great neon sign, and people will come from counties around to see films at this drive-in. It's very easily visible from the route and is one of the more photographed drive-ins along the entire stretch. Shortly after passing through Joplin, travelers enter the next state on their Route 66 journey, Kansas. Though the road is only 13 miles through that state, they make the most of it with several must-see stops and a robust community of roadway enthusiasts. This old Canotech station in Galena is home of the original truck that inspired the look of Mater in the Pixar film Cars, according to John Lasseter. The gift shop now boasts several vintage vehicles that appeal to children and adults alike. I don't think I've ever driven through Galena without at least one car pulled over and people taking pictures of these trucks in this wonderful old station. Riverton, Kansas is home to the Eisler Brothers store, which originally opened in 1925, 1 year before the route was established. It still serves travelers today with groceries, produce, flowers, and gifts. They even have an old-time deli inside where the seats are filled with old-timers spinning yarns for the traveling tourist that's willing to listen. The Brush Creek Bridge is also known as the Rainbow Arch Bridge and the only marsh arch style bridge left on the route. It sits on a short bypass segment outside of Baxter Springs and is a very popular place for people to stop and take pictures with their cars since it's on its own little section of the route. Although this style of bridge doesn't exist in any of the other states the Route 66 goes through, there used to be several in this area, and sadly this is the only one left. Crossing into Oklahoma, Missouri's hills and foliage give way to prairie and ranch land. As the road stretches its legs west, the sky becomes so big that it threatens to swallow those who had never stepped foot out of an eastern metropolis. Commerce is home of Mickey Mantle and gateway to a tri-state mining operation, which famously caused a terrible environment disaster in the nearby town of Pitcher due to soil toxicity levels. The entire town had to be eminent domained. Route 66 bypasses all of that, though, and still serves this small community. The hole-in-the-wall station here is called that because it's built into the side of another building, and you can only see half of it. Cross the street's also a really great burger dive called the Dairy King, which I also recommend. The Coleman Theater in Miami opened in 1929 as a vaudeville institution. Performers on stage here include Will Rogers, Tom Mix, Sally Rand, Bing Crosby, and others. It was beautifully restored in the 1990s and is a real jewel on the Mother Road. This is another place that if you get there and have time to go through the tour, it's well worth it. Their original Wurlitzer organ was discovered and restored, and there's nothing like standing on that stage and listening to those pipes. Between Miami and the next small community of Narcissa is a stretch of Route 66 called the Sidewalk Highway or Ribbon Road. It's the only section of Route 66 left that's only 9 foot wide. It was a cost-saving measure at the time, and locals figured, if you happen to run across another car, you can just pull over and let them pass. Today it serves a few old pickup trucks, the occasional tractor, and Mother Road enthusiasts that want a taste of a bygone era. Afton is home to Afton Station. This is an old DX gas station which was bought and restored in 2000 by Laurel Kane. It's a museum of classic Packard automobiles. Laurel herself was an icon of the Mother Road who sadly passed away in 2016. I have a very personal connection with Laurel as she was one of the first Route 66 personalities I met and actually officiated my wedding in 2015. She was a great lady and I miss her very much. Totem Pole Park is outside of the town of Foyil. Though it is 4 miles off of Route 66, it's still heavily visited by tourists due to its unusual nature. The main attraction, pictured here, was built by Ed Galloway, who's known to Sand Springs residents for his various sculptures through that town here in Oklahoma. Between 1937 and 1948, it was built as the world's largest totem pole at 60 feet. A few other smaller sculptures dot the property, as well as a fiddle house for Ed's large collection of handmade instruments. Claremore is home to Will Rogers. Even though he was born in Oologah, he always said Claremore was easier to say. Much of classic Route 66 has been rebuilt in town. Elms Motel, pictured here, was the last example of a vintage court-style motel along the route. It's now closed and slated for demolition, though any Google search of this property shows they really weren't doing so well when they closed. It'll soon be replaced with a shopping center. The twin bridges across the Verdigris River as you enter Catoosa aren't twin bridges anymore. They were broken up in 2011. The eastbound bridge remains, while the westbound trusses were repurposed for a local restaurant and a roadside park nearby. This still allows travelers to experience them, even when progress has required their removal. This kind of repurposing is key to continuing the attraction of the route through the 21st century, and I'm really glad Catoosa did the right thing. Old Blue, a very familiar sight for anybody in northeast Oklahoma, and he's one of Route 66's most famous roadside attractions overall. He was built in the 1970s as an anniversary present. The site where he is actually also featured an area called Nature's Acres at one time, which had a snake cage, an alligator pit, and other natural attractions. Blue's never looked better. The current owners are also working to restore the rest of the grounds for people to enjoy, but Blue has people on his decks every day of the year. Cyrus Avery Plaza here in Tulsa sits on the banks of the Arkansas River and hosts a statue titled East Meets West, you can see in the background here. This river crossing is regarded as the main reason 66 came through Tulsa in the first place. Thanks to Cyrus Avery's insistence that this bridge was the perfect place to route the new highway, the plan changed from the original thoughts of routing it through Nebraska and more of Kansas to a more southern bend through Missouri and Oklahoma. Tulsa would not have been the same without that bridge, and so we have this area to commemorate that. On the edge of Sapulpa you have another bridge. This is the Rock Creek Bridge, built in 1924 and was originally part of the Ozark Trail, one of the roads that was used to cobble together for Route 66. It was bypassed in 1952, but it still serves traffic today and has a brick deck. It's a great little area for some photographs. Route 66 was Main Street for the majority of small towns it passed through, and Depew in northeast Oklahoma has the sad distinction of being the first Route 66 town to be bypassed with a reroute 2 years after Route 66 was established. Today it's mostly empty brick facades and memories of better days. This is the Lincoln County Express, a child-sized locomotive built by a pipe welder in the 1970s as a gift for his grandchildren. It sits outside of Stroud in a field and was left to the elements decades ago. The fading paint and surrounding overgrowth make it nearly invisible from the road, especially in the summertime. I vividly recall the first time I saw this as I was driving back to Tulsa. I slammed on the brakes and turned around to get a couple of pictures of it, and I've been back several times. The Rock Cafe in Stroud is not only known for its food, but for its owner, Dawn Welch. She was the inspiration behind the Sally Carrera character in the Cars film. She was coming through town, got a flat tire, and ended up moving there. The grill they use, affectionately named Betsy, has been in operation for over 75 years and survived a devastating fire in 2008. Very recently, they even redid the floors inside to replicate the road outside. It's great, and I highly recommend stopping in for a bite. Chandler, Oklahoma is home to a great example of the resurgent energy in Route 66. This is a vintage sign. It was originally on Route 66 in Oklahoma City, but it was taken down over a decade ago when the bowling alley there went out of business. It was in storage after that and was recently purchased and placed outside of an entertainment center that's still under construction as of this recording. It acts as a wonderful bridge between the old and the new. The round barn in Arcadia dates to the late 1800s and was fully restored in the 1990s. Arcadia, which is a community of less than 250, is one of Oklahoma's most popular Route 66 stops. Along with the barn here, there's Pop's nearby, which offers hundreds of varieties of soda pop, a fairly new neon shop called the Glass Boy Studios, and the whimsical OK66 stop, which consists of small-scale replicas of many Route 66 attractions. It's a great little community. Oklahoma City is home of many alignments, which can be confusing for many travelers, but they do have a lot to offer. This is the Milk Bottle Building. It's only 350 square feet inside and was built in the 1930s. It's been a grocery store and other boutiques over the years. The milk bottle wasn't added until 1948 and has advertised a variety of different dairies over the years, including the defunct Townley and most recently Brahms. West of El Reno, Route 66 crosses the Canadian River on this bridge. This 38-truss pony bridge near Bridgeport is the longest of its kind on Route 66 at just shy of 4,000 feet. It was built in 1933 and featured in the film adaptation of The Grapes of Wrath, and contrary to the film, Grandpa Joe is not buried next to it. In 1995, the Museum of Western Trails in Clinton, Oklahoma, had a change of management and focus and became the Route 66 Museum. It's operated by the Oklahoma Historical Society and is considered by most to be the premier Route 66 museum on the entire highway, overshadowing the nearby National Route 66 Museum in Elk City. This abandoned motel building nestles in the weeds on the edge of Elk City. Many rural stretches of 66, as well as downtowns, betray the effects of the interstate and the effect it had on local businesses over the last few decades. While many areas are indeed seeing a resurgence of interest and commerce, it's too late for a great many more. Beckham County Courthouse here in Sayre was built in 1911 and also featured in The Grapes of Wrath as a substitute for our state capitol, which had no dome at the time, and filmmakers thought this looked a little bit more Capitol-like. It's the last major landmark that people see before entering the state of Texas. But before you get to Texas, you go through Eric, 8 miles from the border. It's the home of Sheb Wooley, of Purple People Eater fame, and Roger Miller, known as King of the Road, and a genuine Route 66 character. This is the Sandhills Curiosity Shop, opened by Harley and Annabelle Russell, calling themselves the mediocre music makers at the redneck capital of the world. They perform a See It to Believe It collection of, they have a See It to Believe It collection of vintage roadside artifacts and have a delightfully unique musical serenading experience. Although Annabelle sadly passed away a few years ago, Harley keeps up the tradition, and if you drive by and the doors open, stop in. You will not regret it. As roadway nomads enter the Lone Star State, the landscape flattens out completely. farms and ranches stretch out as far as the eye can see, and solitary silos dot the horizon like mile markers for Paul Bunyan. This is Tower Station, and you drop in Shamrock, Texas. It was built in 1936 and was inspired by the sight of a nail being stuck in the soil. It's a stunning example of Art Deco architecture along the route and was brought back from the brink of destruction in the 1990s. It now houses the Shamrock Chamber of Commerce and is one of the road's most popular stops, for good reason. It's stunning. Downtown McLean is sparsely populated these days, but it does boast the first Phillips 66 station built in the state. It's empty today, but locals have repainted it to simulate its glory days as a pit stop for thirsty automobiles and makes for some interesting photographs. Amarillo has a great art district in the heart of the city, right on an old alignment of Route 66. However, the roadside attraction most people are familiar with is the iconic Cadillac Ranch. This collection of partially buried cars attracts people from all over the world and encourages them to leave their mark on one of these cars half buried in a pasture, still in full view of I-40 and Route 66. The Cadillacs featured here range from 1946 to 1963. Definitely different every time you stop. The midpoint of Route 66, that is the halfway point between Chicago and Los Angeles, is in Adrian, Texas. Adrian is also the home to the Midpoint Cafe, which is right behind me as I'm taking this picture. They are a long-standing Mother Road institution and home of some really excellent pie. Sitting on the border of Texas and New Mexico at exit 0 is the ghost town of Glen Rio. Depending on which way you came through town back in the day, you would be greeted by the first motel in Texas and the last motel in Texas. Today, really, the only residents of this once thriving community are tumbleweeds and dust devils. The Rock Island Railroad even pulled up the tracks. This old Texaco on the east end of town hasn't welcomed a customer in decades. To the west, the pavement of Route 66 disintegrates into gravel as it crosses into New Mexico. New Mexico is known as the Land of Enchantment, partially thanks to its iconic blue skies and ever-changing landscape. It's not long before that flat Texas prairie at the border transforms into a geological wonderland of mountains, valleys, and volcanic rock. Billboards out west still encourage wandering souls to visit Tucumcari tonight. The Blue Swallow has served those souls since 1939. Their neon is well known to roadside enthusiasts. Family owned with a selection of classic cars alternately parked beneath their beautiful sign, it invites closer inspection whether you're staying the night or not. My wife and I could also talk to you about the amazing food at Dell's Cafe across the street. It's worth the drive in and of itself. Really, the Blue Swallow is just a wonderfully restored place. Many Route 66 communities in New Mexico, such as Cuervo here, are hardly more than ghost towns today. The dry climate acts as something of a preservative to many of their abandoned buildings, creating a landscape that brings to mind ghost stories or apocalypse tales. Those that still call these towns home are hardy folks, the personification of freedom and perseverance. I'm a city boy myself, but the folks that live out here would be more than happy to tell you why it's much better out west. Whiting Brothers service stations were plentiful during Route 66's golden years. Some locations have been restored while others languish in decay. Moriarty is home to the only station that's still active and displaying their original signage. It has very beautiful colors, the red and the yellow. There are quite a few abandoned signs on the route that are great for pictures too. Albuquerque has a wonderfully preserved segment of 66 that goes right through their downtown. The Chemo Theater is one of Albuquerque's most striking architectural landmarks. It was built in 1927 in the Art Deco Pueblo Revival style, which I didn't even know was a thing till I saw this with my own eyes. Another site that was saved from the wrecking ball due to the decline of Route 66 in the 70s and 80s and beautifully restored. Gallup, New Mexico is home to a wealth of neon signage that attracts people from all over the country, including here at the Hotel El Rancho. It was built in the 1930s and hosted many movie stars in the early days of Hollywood. You walk into that lobby and it suddenly feels like you're back in a black and white silver screen adventure. Each room is named after a famous guest that has slept under their roof over the years. The mesas of Arizona are visible as you approach the border, giving a preview to the westbound motorist of the landscape changes to come. The railroad mirrors Route 66 through much of the west, such as at this spot near Manuelito. This picture was taken at sunrise, and you can see that light there on the top of those mesas, getting ready to greet the day. The landscape continues to become more dynamic as you enter Arizona. The Will Rogers Highway snakes by the Painted Desert, Meteor Crater, several national forests, the Grand Canyon, the Black Mountains. There's always something to see here. The Painted Desert Trading Post once served as an oasis of trinkets, gasoline, and refreshment, supposedly once even to an airplane that had made an emergency landing on the flat expanse of concrete out front. Today it sits on private property, the king of an abandoned alignment near the Petrified Forest National Park. It's invisible to the interstate traveler and cannot be accessed without landowner permission. Most roadies consider it the holy grail of abandoned Route 66 sites. The nearby Petrified Forest National Park also hosts an annual tour of old trading post sites, which includes a stop out here at the Painted Desert Trading Post. Very lucky to have seen it myself. The Jackrabbit Trading Post is something of a last man standing among a great number of old Route 66 curio shops in eastern Arizona. Their billboard is known worldwide. It still entices folks to take the off-ramp at Joseph City and experience the country on two lanes. Home to the original giant saddle-wearing jackrabbit, like the one I mentioned at Henry's Rabbit Ranch back in Illinois, for tourists to mount and have their picture taken and say, "Here I am, too." Standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona is not just a line from the Eagles song "Taking It Easy," but it's the centerpiece of this town. Tourists often stop to take pictures next to the flatbed Ford or with one of the statues on site. A block away, the La Posada Hotel hosts an international audience, having been restored to its glory days as a Harvey House institution. The La Posada is worth a tour even if you aren't calling Winslow home for the night. It is really special and something of a museum to its architect. Two Guns is another abandoned trading post along the truncated lanes of Arizona 66, this one boasting a rich history of murder and betrayal. They once provided tours of the Apache Death Cave nearby and offered views of exotic animals through rudimentary cages of mortar and chicken wire. The site has a storied history of gunplay, betrayal, and just plain bad luck that I encourage you to look up. Today, though, it's not much more than stone rubble in the shadow of the interstate. Yet another abandoned trading post, Twin Arrows, opened originally in 1937. The iconic arrows were built in 1955 using telephone poles, quickly making the rest stop a bustling must-see. It declined after the bypass came through in 1960, though the property was partially restored in 2009. Today it is abandoned again and has fallen back into disrepair. Flagstaff is a common stop for tourists coming to Arizona to see the Grand Canyon. As such, they've been able to maintain a busy yet authentic downtown district that harkens back to the early days of the route. They have a great number of vintage signs all over town and many local-owned boutiques and restaurants. Great energy here. Williams is known as the gateway to the Grand Canyon, as they offer railroad service straight to America's greatest natural landmark. It was the last town to be bypassed by the interstate, taking place in 1984, and they've held on thanks to the significant draw of the canyon. Walking the streets of Williams still feels like it must have back in the days of Truman and Eisenhower. Seligman holds a special place in the hearts of all Route 66 fans. It's the birthplace of the first historic Route 66 association, made possible by their most famous resident, Angel Delgadillo. The town features several vibrant gift shops as well, such as Seligman Sundries pictured here. As mentioned, Angel Delgadillo is the man who was most influential in founding the historic Route 66 Association of Arizona. When he saw business dry up firsthand overnight after the interstate opened, he lobbied for about 10 years to have Route 66 recognized and remembered. It started a chain reaction that is responsible for historic associations existing in all 8 states. His barbershop is continuously visited by busloads of tourists eager to meet the man known as the Angel of Route 66. This is his office, which is completely covered in a ton of business cards, photos, and other mementos. I can't go past Seligman without mentioning the iconic Burma Shave signage, which line the highway in both directions. Though they're not original, it doesn't matter to the motorist that smiles as they read the jingle out their car window as they are going to and from Seligman. Hackberry General Store was once operated by Bob Waldmeyer, part of the same family that runs the Cozy Dog back in Illinois. Bob was also the inspiration for the Fillmore Volkswagen bus character in the Cars film. He was a well-known Route 66 enthusiast and artist. In fact, a great many of his hand-drawn designs are still available on postcards all along the route. Though Bob is no longer with us, the shop is still open and greets travelers from all across the globe. Kingman is a popular Route 66 destination for folks that flew into Las Vegas for the weekend and want to see what 66 is about. They have a host of tourist offerings, such as a transportation museum and Mr. D's Diner here. Route 66 is renamed Andy Devine Avenue through town in honor of their resident that went on to star in Hollywood films with John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart. Beyond Kingman, the road snakes upward through the Black Mountains. It's one of the most spectacular and picturesque segments of the old road. The steep and winding lanes reach an altitude of 3,523 feet before descending through the town of Oatman, an Old West-era mining town famous for wandering burros on the blacktop. They're rather domesticated and will come right up to your car window to say hello. The variety of the Arizona landscape gives way to the Great Mojave after crossing the Colorado River. This was the most treacherous part of the highway for westward travelers back when the route was new. You'd better make sure the water bags are full and the gas tank is also full before setting out across the unforgiving desert. Roy's Cafe in Amboy, here, is the only stop for miles and miles. The desolate landscape is one of the most iconic views of Route 66. Elmer's Bottle Tree Ranch, west of Barstow, features hundreds of metal trees full of colorful bottles, among other kitschy elements. It's a beautiful art installation that always has something new to see. And if you're wandering through here and the wind kicks up, you'll swear you're listening to ghosts singing. San Bernardino is the site of Will Rogers' final performance before his fateful flight to Alaska. It's also home to the original McDonald's and a Wigwam Motel. It's one of two on the route, the other one being back in Holbrook, Arizona. These cone-shaped units were saved from an infamous rent-by-the-hour reputation and have been lovingly restored. They offer an authentic taste of the kitschy tourist experience that Route 66 celebrates and is known for. This statue is called Madonna of the Trail and is actually one of 12 monuments of this type throughout the United States. They were built to provide a symbol of the courage and faith of the women whose strength and love aided so greatly in conquering the wilderness and establishing permanent homes in the West. There are two on Route 66, this one in Upland, California, and one back in Albuquerque. The Colorado Street Bridge in Pasadena was built in 1912 and is a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark. It's an absolutely beautiful span. Sadly, it's also known as Suicide Bridge due to the great number of people that have jumped to their deaths from the deck. That's not as much of a problem these days, and it's a beautiful bridge to behold, whether you're on the deck itself or in the valley below. This is the end of the route marker that most people know. It sits on the boardwalk of the Santa Monica Pier, which is the modern terminus for the Mother Road. It's constantly barraged by tourists for selfies and family photos, even if that's the only time they spend on the Mother Road at all. That's not to diminish its importance at all. It's a mark of achievement for those who have turned miles across the American West. However, there's one more marker that actually interests me a little more, being from Oklahoma, and should interest those with a historic interest in the highway too. This is the Will Rogers Highway marker that sits in Palisade Park, 2 blocks north of the Santa Monica Pier. It celebrates the rebranding of the route as the Will Rogers Highway in 1952. It reads, Will Rogers, humorist, world traveler, good neighbor. This main street of America, Highway 66, was the first road he traveled in a career that led him straight to the hearts of his countrymen. Historic markers along Route 66 in Oklahoma still bear Will's face on them. So, to summarize the journey I've taken everybody on here, Route 66 encompasses the American experience by showcasing the things that make this country great. From the sprawling metropolis to the community where everyone knows your name. From the cornfields to the prairie to the desert to the ocean itself. The scenery is in constant flux. Shop owners shake your hand, and the diner food that comes on your plate came from a handed-down family recipe. It really is a living museum and has something that appeals to all curious souls. So thank you very much for joining me as I talked through my presentation here. I do have other pictures and information at a few different sources. My main website is www.cloudlesslens.com. I have a travel blog at reesfunk.com where I write about my travels on Route 66 and other places throughout the U.S. I have an Instagram account which is labeled here, and then a Facebook page that I also use to update on events and other pictures and things like that. So thank you very much. Please leave any comments. One thing I will mention is that this presentation was put together to fit within a 45-minute window. It was very difficult to decide what to include and what not to include. So I imagine most everybody's going to have a site that they're thinking, oh, why didn't you include this? And I assure you it was very difficult to cull certain things from this list. And I'd like to put another one together someday to provide as an alternate to this. So we'll see. Thank you very much.